Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today, referring to a topic which is very important to me, is the one that already Elisabetta introduced in her speech, referring to the importance and relevance of having the patient voice very strong in all the different IMI initiatives. That's the title of my presentation, Patient and Public Involvement, PPI, in some of the IMI research portfolio. My name is Ana Diaz, by the way, sorry, and I work at Alzheimer Europe as project officer. So just to give you an idea of the main topics I would like to cover here with you today. First, I would like to talk about the importance of dementia research for people with dementia and their carers. Also, a bit of introduction about what, at least at Alzheimer Europe, what we understand by patient and public involvement. A bit of the work that Alzheimer Europe has been developing in that area in IMI. Some examples of how we, in practice, are trying to bring the patient voice to the different projects, and then some conclusions about this. So I think the first I'm going to actually is about the importance of dementia research for people with dementia. I think it's a bit of a stating the obvious, of course, but it's something important to be reminded that, of course, all the work that we do every day, the very important work that we do in the labs, the different places where we each work in our universities, is, of course, the most important is for those who will eventually benefit from this research, and that also in the actual unfortunate scenario where there's still not a cure for dementia, any research is really valuable for people with dementia. And also because we are in a fortunate time where in many countries, unfortunately not yet everywhere, but diagnosis is happening more timely. So it's happening at very earlier stages where people with dementia are still mild at the stage of dementia, so they are much able and to contribute and to give their opinions and their voices. And this is a phenomenon over the last decade or so, where we have more people, more advocates, people with dementia themselves, talking about what they want and how they want the care, the treatment. And that's the slogan. I think it was started by the disability movement, but it's also now very much used in the dementia field, and it's nothing about us without us. And I think Involve, one is the main organizations in PPI. They refer to the right of people, the patients, to have a say about about what and how publicly funded dementia research should be undertaken. But it's also about people with dementia themselves wanting to share their experiential knowledge and wanting to be present in that research. We listening yesterday to Helen's powerful speech about research giving hope to her and being real, the way where she's found meaning in life again. But also it's not just about the benefits for people with dementia being involved in research. It's also because they can provide a unique perspective for us, for the researchers, from what it's like to live with dementia. So more of the inside perspective. And I think a final word is that I think something that's important is they want to be involved in a meaningful way. And when we talk to people with dementia, we often also listen, they don't want to be involved in a tokenistic manner. They want full and meaningful involvement. So what is patient and public involvement now? Is mainly, I think, Involve, the UK organization, refers to research which is developed with and by people with dementia and not just to or for them. It's about actively and meaningfully involving patients in the research process rather than being a research participant. So it's a slightly different way of having people with dementia involved. It's not there's just contributing and being part of our research, but trying to bring them early on from the very beginning and being part of the research process. So when you're starting to think to do any type of research? Is that something, is that topic, is that area, something that's important for people with dementia? And also later on when you start kind of developing your research, the way you are thinking about it, is that the way that will be meaningful to them, is that the way your future research participants will have a good experience of being in your research trial. So it's involving them from the beginning to the end of your research process. And it's about creating, and I think that's a key word in PPI, it's about true partnerships between people with dementia and all the other stakeholders who are involved in research. And a very important aspect is somehow all this new movement is moving away from the idea that the knowledge is owned by the researchers, but it's also acknowledging of the value of the knowledge of the people living with the condition and trying to understand the different type of knowledge and what different people can bring to the table. And before progressing, I was to give attention talking about PPI as a one single entity, but PPI also is quite complex, and we can have different ways of involving people with dementia. So it's not just one way or one recipe for that. And the first thing is that there could be many different ways. So it could go from involving patients or people with dementia in a very concrete particular task to actually the other end of the spectrum when you have them, you might have patients or people with dementia in this situation fully involved as part of your research team. And then you have in between many other ways where you could involve, for instance, people living with the condition and carers at different stages of your research process. And from our perspective, and this is Alzheimer Europe perspective, we believe all of them are important, and the one you might choose for your research project is depending on your study, your skills, what is needed, what people might want. Perhaps the patient, the people that might want to be involved, might prefer to be involved in a particular way. And it's at the end of the day trying to see what is meaningful for that particular research at that particular time and for that particular people. So that's just to show it's not as much a hierarchy of involvement, it's just different types who might be more or less meaningful depending on each of the different research. And I'm talking here about PPI, but I can imagine you start thinking, well, that doesn't sound very easy. And you're right, there are many, many challenges. Who to involve, how, when, what's the value, what's the impact. And I have to say, if this is in general for any type of patient engagement, when it comes to dementia, the challenges are even bigger because there's still many stereotypes about the value of the contributions of people with dementia. Can they really contribute? Can we ask them? But also sometimes we might not feel equipped to involve them in this way. It might be something new for many people. It might be not easy and straightforward to do this. Also, I was pointing at the beginning that we are celebrating a more timely diagnosis in many places, but this is not still a reality everywhere. So it's also in many countries and in many areas of some countries where still dementia is diagnosed at a later stage or not diagnosed at all. And that, of course, is going to be more difficult to involve people with dementia. We also, when we are ourselves thinking about our involvement, we tend to involve people at earlier stages because it's, of course, easier. And we're not kind of thinking, what can we do to involve people in more advanced stages with people with moderate dementia? Is that possible? How can we do that? So it's another extra challenge. And finally, I think as we talk about biomedical research, the field is moving every single time to earlier and earlier stages. Now in the new understanding of Alzheimer's disease, we are thinking the whole spectrum. So we are not confronted also when we are talking about different type of research. They are involving people prior to the onset of dementia. So how we are going to involve people, not just at the later stages, but now the opposite, who have at the MCI stage, mild cognitive impairment. Learner, I'm looking at you for the abbreviations. People who are earlier, people who are at all these stages prior to dementia. So we have many, many challenges. But we wanted to tell you about how we, Alzheimer Europe, have been thinking about PPI along the years. And for us, the PPI is not something new. We started a few years ago, around the year 2000. And at that time, we were relying only on a few people, more ad hoc kind of contribution, and we had Peter Ashley there in the photo and James McKillop, who for particular topics. They might help us thinking what people with dementia, what their opinion, how they feel about different issues. And that was for many years a more ad hoc kind of involvement. And throughout the years and since 2012, we wanted to do something more systematic. We were to have something more structured about how we involve people with dementia. And in 2012, my colleague Diane Gove and Jean, they set up the European Working Group of People with Dementia. And this is a group of people who have dementia themselves. And we have, as today, 13 members. They are from different countries. They have different type of dementia. And they all want to be involved in the work of Alzheimer Europe. We meet face-to-face 3 to 4 times a year, and we involve them in all the work that we do, and that also includes all the projects, IMI, of course, projects where Alzheimer Europe is involved. We also developed in this development of PPI, we also developed and published a few years ago a position paper on involving people with dementia in research through PPI. And in developing that article, we had Interdem, but also the European Working Group People with Dementia involved in writing the paper. And we had 5 main ideas you have there that we thought were very important to consider for anyone that wants to implement patient involvement. And I wasn't just to show you some of the examples, I'm just looking at 3 IMI projects, RadMap, EPAD, and RADAR-AD, but also at the end I would like to talk about Paradigm, which is not in the Euronet Consortium, but it's about patient engagement itself. And I think as Elisabetta was explaining at the beginning, there's many ways in which we have been involved in bringing the voice of people with dementia. One, as she explained, we are full partners in all of these projects. Also, as Carlos was saying, we also contribute to the communication of these projects, making sure all that is in the scientific, very high-level information gets through the community, dementia community, and the people are involved. But what I wanted to describe here today is the more concrete work that we are doing, where we are directly and actively involving people with dementia themselves in these projects. So the first of the projects I wanted to bring to your attention is RadMap. And so I need to read because I'm really bad remembering titles. So RadMap is about real-world outcomes across the Alzheimer's disease spectrum for better care. You have there the website in case you are interested. And I know, as we've been told before, there will be sessions where you have the opportunity to learn about the project. So I'm not going to go in detail about the project, but how patient engagement, patient involvement was developed. And in this RadMap project is about real-world outcomes, and they had the idea to provide the foundation for an integrated data framework for real-world outcomes in dementia. And a very core issue within that development was to have a consensual agreement of what outcome measures means. And we, within the whole RadMap different work, we thought that what was really essential for people with dementia was very much involved to be present in that understanding of outcomes, so what outcomes mean to somebody with dementia, and to make sure that we're quite involved in that. So what we did, and that's a picture actually on the day, that's me in the corner, that's the group of people with dementia. We had a 2-day consultation in Luxembourg. We had our European Working Group of People with Dementia, and also we invited the supporters, the carers, to also come along. We had 2 days where people from RadMap came to us, and we had different groups with them. They provided feedback on an online survey that RadMap was developing for different stakeholders. One of the stakeholders were people with dementia. So they were looking at the different surveys, how things were phrased, and trying to give feedback about how to make sure this survey was, on the one hand, accessible, but also looking at, for instance, the one from researchers and what we're asking to them. And also that we had discussions about outcome measures, challenges, how they feel about the different scales that exist, how they feel that we should progress on the project, so trying to provide feedback to the project leaders about how they should progress. Based on this discussion, then Work Package 2, the Work Package on this outcome measure, did the same discussion with other stakeholders. So they follow, rather than having different discussions, and we being the last one to come to the table, we're the first one kind of having the basis for that. And then with that discussion, they have the similar groups with clinicians, researchers, different stakeholders. And then the group had the chance to provide comments to the report, and we had a final meeting explaining to them how all the input had been used. And this is just a few words from Chris Robert. He's the vice chair of the working group, and he had an interview. You had the link to the full interview, but I think that was a bit of how he felt about being involved in that way, and again, value and purpose and hope, and that was very important to him. Radar it is about functioning in dementia, so it's using actual existing devices like smartwatches, apps, and other devices to try to understand better functioning in the whole spectrum of Alzheimer's disease. And again, when you think about it, here it was not just one issue that was important for us. We thought there are so many different areas that we need to have to bring the voices of people with dementia. It's about what's a functional domain, what's functioning, what's important. It's about the devices, what is going to be used. It's about the different ethical issues. It's about the clinical studies. So we saw it's not a one kind of topic. It's across the whole symposium. And we have two different elements. We had a patient advisory board, the PAB, and then also we had decided to have some focus groups in different countries to also more one-off focus groups. Combined with a kind of PAB that will accompany the project for the whole 3.5 years. This is a PAB, so that's the people with dementia. That was the first consultation. Everybody has been invited to join the PAB, but then we selected 4 people with dementia and 4 carers who had an special interest on this topic. And they're really working closely with their researchers and also trying to be more involved in the whole process. And this is the diagram shows a bit of the way we work, about working closely and bridging the researchers' needs and process with how to actually involve people with dementia and how to take these questions in a meaningful way to them and then feed them back to their researchers, but then making sure whatever is happening feeds back again to the PAB, because that second part often is forgotten. These are some examples of the work we've done so far from March to now. So you see we have been very, very busy. And something that we are very keen now is to understand better the impact. So to make sure feedback is used, understanding better how it's used, but also for the people who've been involved to have more information about how being there is been important for the project, and we have a much emphasis on that side. So trying to make sure everything fits in the whole, and you see they are in the diagram, fits well in the whole, rather than being a one-off ad hoc consultation. And you have there some examples about reviewing the protocol, reviewing the different participant information sheets, but also contributing to helping the device selection, discussing ethical issues like vulnerability and stigma in the project. So many, many different feedback so far. We are really happy. And finally, EPAD is about the European Prevention Alzheimer's Disease Consortium. Alzheimer Europe has not been as much involved. Within EPAD, the panel participant sits in the ethics, within the ethics work, and in that way we have been involved, but we have not been facilitating the discussions. But I think it's another model, so I wanted to show that to you, where they have people who are participants who are then from in the local level, who provide feedback on good and bad elements of the study experience and recommendations from improvement. And then they have 5 of these panels, local panels, but then they have 1 from each of the local panels who meet globally in the different meetings of EPAD. So it's another model, another way of looking at patient involvement. Finally, a few words about Paradigm. Just to bring to your attention, this is also an IMI project. It's looking at patient engagement across patient different conditions, and it's looking at how to develop a sustainable framework from patient engagement that also demonstrate the value of patient engagement. And they're looking at 3 particular points. The first is research and priority setting, how to do patient engagement at that point. The second is the design of clinical trials. And the last one, and more challenging one, is about early dialogues with regulators and health and HTA bodies. And we have been also involved in that project very very much from the beginning. They're trying to look at the needs, the gaps, and develop tools and metrics in the future. So that will be the end product, to have tools and metrics. And from our perspective, together with an organization in Spain who is working with children and young patients, we are trying to fit here the perspective of the vulnerable groups. So when we're looking at patient engagement for many different patients, what we need to consider if you were to involve somebody with dementia or a young patient. And that's our contribution to that project. So just a few conclusions. I think there's an increasing consensus and appetite for PPI. But PPI should happen in a way which is planned, organized, and monitored, and also has to be meaningful and respect of the people involved. So it's just not just to bring a few people to the table. We have to be very careful about how to organize it. It's not set in stone. I think from us, we have completely changing, evolving, and I think that's part of the beauty of PPI. There's no recipe. I think it's good to get in touch with other initiatives, to talk to people who are doing, and to try to find what works for you. And finally, just to say again, Paradigm will be, by next year, June, July, they will have the final documents, and hopefully we'll have a lot of tools and a good framework for looking at the impact. So that might be also very useful if any of you is deciding or thinking about doing PPI in the projects you are involved in your research. Thank you very much for your attention.